one of the things that we as adults have to face is fear of death. I think it's kind of like the natural process that happens as we start to mature and grow. And I think, particularly, parenthood really drives it home because, like, the second I found out that I was pregnant, I was immediately terrified of dying. Well, terrified's not the right word. I was immediately struck with the realization that at any moment, the child that was growing inside me could die, and that I also could die. And previous to being pregnant, I didn't care that much. Not that I didn't care. I mean, I wanted to live, but like I wasn't concerned about it. It was not something that I was afraid of or thought about. And it's kind of like, well, if it happens, it happens. But then the process of becoming a parent brought me face to face with the fear of death, and particularly the process of being pregnant. It was like a 8.5 month just process of like, I could die tomorrow. I could die. My child could die. We could all die. Like, what if she doesn't make it? What if I don't make it? What if when I give birth I don't make it? And there's this it's an exercise in learning to keep the fear thoughts at bay, first off, and not letting it turn into like full blown anxiety or panic in the body. And it's just sort of like a thought in the mind that I learned to push aside, or not push aside, because I'm not I don't try to like deny my fears or my emotions, but thoughts are a little bit differently because they kind of run rampant in the mind. And so we do have the ability to say, like, I'm going to push this thought like to the edge of my awareness. And so I don't have it just like constantly, just like, boom, boom, boom. But the fear of death, I think that we all have to reconcile that. And I think that religion is a really powerful tool. I think that's, why a lot of people end up in religion, because it gives them peace and assurance of what life is like after death. This is what my face is like without makeup. I'm just like seeing myself in the video, and I saw this thread on X where people were like, "Do you prefer a woman with or without makeup?" And I'm like, "Man, I do my YouTube videos just like all natural." So that just is what it is. I'm still waking up. I'm drinking my coffee, having my morning musings. This is authentic Elizabeth. Mm. Anyways, and I just think it's an important part of maturing is facing that fear of death. And then what happens as we have undergone that process of facing death is that later, because I feel like I did go through that process, then what happens is at a certain point it doesn't have a sway on me. Now, I'll be clear. I personally, I'm not afraid to die. I feel pretty confident about what happens on the other side. I have, you know, um, there are people in my life that have a range of beliefs about this. My sister-in-law thinks there's nothing, just you die and then there's nothing. And then my parents are extremely religious. My dad's actually a minister. I grew up in a minister's family, and so they have very detailed ideas of what they believe happens after death, as I was taught in the religion that I was raised in. And I happen to think, well, actually, some things that really resonated with me were the Dolores Cannon books, because she was working with hypnotherapy, and she had like thousands of people that she put into hypnosis and that went into past life regressions and were able to articulate and recall the experiences that they had between lifetimes in the spirit world. Um, and that's you can check out her books, but she had thousands of people that were corroborating the same story, but they didn't know each other's stories. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then there's also this book that was written in like the 70s, I think. And it's called Journey of Souls. And it was also another hypnotist. And, you know, when I really think about it, and it just feels like the most accurate idea. And so what the idea is that we have you know, we have these different parts. There's our body, and then there is like the consciousness that inhabits the body, and some people call that like your soul, and that's the part of you that never dies. You know, Osho talks about, I'm sorry, not Osho, Muji talks about this, where he'll talk about, you know, he'll say to somebody like, hey, what's the part of you that is watching you having the conversation that you're having right now? So here I am on a video, my eyes are watching myself in the video, but then behind my eyes, there's this other part of me that's like, oh, look at how tired you look. Oh, you don't have makeup on, right? That like script. And so there's like the part of me that's observing this thing that's happening here. And it's we all have this part of us that is eternal. And so that is the part that I think doesn't die. And so but then you have like your thoughts in your mind, and I don't think that that is exactly the same as your soul kind of higher consciousness self. And so I think that we can kind of like transition in and out of these different bodies, as they're called. You know, religions talk about like your soul body, your spiritual body, your mental body, your physical body, and they are viewed as sort of like distinct entities, but we're all existing inside this particular body. And so what a lot of people believe, or what I is kind of my favorite theory, is that we come into physical bodies for the purpose of learning what we're here to learn. So this soul is eternal. This soul, you know, comes from the spirit world, and that's why, you know, we get this sense that this is not like our permanent home, or there's something more, or there's you know, for me as a child, I remember just feeling this longing for just deep loving connection, and it just felt kind of empty here in a way. And I would touch glimmers of that in church, and I really connect with it when I'm sitting in chanting and prayer and meditation, and also in the times I feel like I can really touch it in the times that I have been able to experience like a microdose psilocybin experience. And but I believe that our souls come into bodies to have experiences, to have lessons, to go through certain things, and then when the body dies and the soul leaves the body, I I really don't think that there's a hell. And you know, if anybody has had the patience to sit through the hours of videos that I've been posting over the past few weeks, where I've sort of been like talking about like a little bit of the conflict that I've been having. The conflict that I've been having is not in what I believe. The conflict that I finally realized what it was is it was old programming. It was, you know, the big thing about this channel when I started it was that I had come out of the church and that I was learning how to deprogram my mind. And so I'm pretty confident about what I believe for myself, and that gives me peace. but there are still remnants of the programming. And so there's this thought form that was put into my mind at the youngest of ages that there's a heaven, there's a hell, and if you do not accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, when you die, you will go to hell, and hell is a very bad place. And, we want everyone to go to heaven. And so, and And so I had somebody that had come onto my page on my social media. I don't think she really sat through the entire video, so she didn't get like the full explanation of what I was trying to say, because I really didn't feel like I pulled everything together in the second half of the video. She watched the first half, but she was really insistent about evil being real and hell being real and the devil being real and all of that. And I mean, for her it is. And if you've taken the time to watch these videos, then you know that I'm not denying evil in the world. I do believe that we act in good and evil ways. I believe that there is the potential for that in all of us, and I believe that we as human, it's always both, and we choose with our free will which way we're going to go in each moment. And sometimes people give themselves over to it, and they just let themselves go down a particular path. And like, for example, in the last video that I was crying after watching the Star Wars saga, and this is the conflict that we see a lot with Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker, with Kylo Ren and Ben, and also, like, if you are a fan of the Avatar: The Last Airbender, Zuko goes through this. He's sort of like raised. It's kind of opposite, because he's raised in a family that's quite. I mean, I guess I would just say abusive. The Firebender, the Fire Nation, and his particular father is Sozin. Is quite or I guess that was his grandfather, but obviously they're like bent on dominating the world, so he cultivating like the evil, but Zuko just isn't evil. And so he really battles like that on the other side. And so the point is that it's like each moment, and when we give ourselves over to evil actions, of course, there is a cost. And do I believe that the cost is that we burn in hell? I don't think it quite works that way. I think that's like a simplistic way of viewing it, because if we're here to learn lessons, then what happens is, if we make decisions that are, let's call them lower vibrational decisions, I don't think that there's like retribution that comes to us in the form of eternal damnation or eternal punishment, because I think that the point is that we learn. I think that the point is that we learn and grow. And so I think that what happens is that we have to face the natural consequence of the choices that we make. So, for example, in the last video, I was saying that Ben had become like, so there's, for those of you that are not as nerdy as I am and don't have the background, there is a character that was good, and he became evil. Well, his actions were evil, but he was kind of struggling in battling the good and evil within him. And then, towards the end, he came back to the good side. And and there was a love in his life, like a loving connection. But he ended up dying, and he wasn't able to experience like a fruitful and loving romantic relationship with this person. And I was noting that a large part of that is likely because of the choices that he had made to do just some of the awful, terrible things that he had done by lashing out in anger to other people, that there's a cost. And so it's not like there is some external entity that is waiting to punish you for turning to the evil side, or that Satan is there going, ooh, yes, I have your soul now. I think it's a little bit more like when we make decisions that have consequences, those come back to us, because I truly believe that what we give out comes back to us. That is a universal principle. You see it in many religions. So if you give out good, if you are generous, if you're giving, if you have gratitude, then you, I think, have an abundant life, and things come to you, and you're not in scarcity and lack. And, things really always do come back around and work out. And if you are giving out, if you're making life really difficult for people, and you're giving out, anger and frustration and discord, and even just outright robbing people, raping people, murdering people, stealing, that's like the extreme of it. Or like maybe you're the CEO of a corporation, or on the board of a corporation, and you do things so that the corporation is doing really terrible things, like, for instance, polluting the planet, or very unethically, preying on people in a way. Those are things that I believe come back to you. And my personal view is that it makes the most sense that we do this over the course of multiple lifetimes, that it just makes the most sense that we would have a go at it. And then, and Dolores Cannon does talk about this, a lot of people have these kinds of memories under hypnosis, and it really seems to resonate and make sense to me that then we, between lifetimes, have a period of reflection where we kind of like view the life that we just lived, and we might review certain parts of it, or certain events, or certain relationships, and then kind of like look at our responses to those events and say, like, okay, did we grow? Did we learn what we came here to learn? Did we kind of mess it up? Do we need to like look at a certain thing? And so, when I was a kid, I was really spoiled, in a weird way, because I wasn't raised in a rich or upper class family, but I was like kind of lazy. I remember I would just like kind of sit and ask my friends, like, oh, can you get that for me? Or can you do this for me? And later in my life, when I started to like imagine about past lives, and if past lives could be real, and if they were, then like, did I have past lives? And if I did, then could I remember them? And what does remembering a past life feel like? Is it like remembering a dream? Is it like a clear memory where people will be like, well, in a past life I did this, this, and this, and this? Or is it more like impressions, or vague kind of almost memories, things that you can almost touch? And I started to wonder, like, gosh, I wonder, like, I had this idea that like in a past life I had lived like as a very spoiled upper class person. And so the journey in this lifetime was, when I became an adult, I traveled and I learned to live completely without money, and I lived in the mountains, and I lived semi off grid, and I lived on like nothing. And the path was to be grateful and to understand that the universe always provides for me, and that there is this abundance. And now I do not have fear of being without money, because I know that I'll still survive without money. And that was like a super, super, super powerful lesson. That's probably like a whole nother video about not being afraid of not having money, but it connects to the not being afraid of death, because I just have this peace about it. And so other people, they might want to project like, oh, you're going to hell when you die. And that's their belief. And if I do, I really, really, there isn't any part of me that believes that that's true. There really isn't. I have a true peace about my soul and the suffering that people experience, I think, is suffering that they create for themselves. And the hell that people experience, I think, is here. I think that we have moments or times. I mean, I have an ex who had just a horrific childhood. And I mean, I think that's hell. That was hell for him. And one can only hope that if tragic and awful things like that have happened to him in his life, that there is some sort of lesson learned from it or some kind of value gained from it. It's hard to imagine value being gained from abuse, especially of children. It's not something that I would ever wish on anybody. But if it has to happen, then hopefully there is some good. But I just wanted to hop on here and talk about this idea of reconciling the fear of death, because I think that when we reconcile it in our own lives, it becomes easier to accept death in other people. And I don't mean like callously, like, oh, okay, that means it's okay for like people to be murdered and it's okay for war to happen, because I feel like we can balance confronting fear of death with valuing life as well, because I do value life, and I value life for myself and I value life for other people. But I am in the process of, I have a dog that I've raised since he was a puppy. There were some in between years where he was living with my ex and he's come back to live with me, but we are in like doggy hospice stage right now, and he's starting to have some pretty serious like health challenges and physical challenges, and it's being clear that he's in pain. And the question sort of becomes like, at what point are we hanging on to this animal because we're being selfish and we don't want to let him go? And at what point is it compassionate for us to say, well, it's time for you to cross the rainbow bridge. It's time for you to be out of your suffering. It's time for you to leave the body that's holding you down and for your soul to fly free. And, I guess it's a little different conversation for a dog, because I don't think there's hell for dogs either. We're not talking about like fear of where his soul is going to go. But what are your thoughts on death? How do you guys handle the fear of it? Or how have you traversed it? I think COVID was a powerful exercise in this, because I think that media and society really played on our fear of death. And there was a certain point where it felt like it was terrifying just to go out into the community, right? For one reason or another. And so at a certain point, and I work in people's homes, I do house cleaning. And so at a certain point, I felt the need to just sort of say, you know what, if it's my time, it's my time. And I'm not going to let my fear of getting sick affect my ability to connect with other people, because I'm alive now and I'm a social person and I need to connect with other people. And so I chose to not ignore the fear. It's not a bypassing. I don't think it's healthy to just say, oh, well, I'm going to ignore my fear and do it. I mean, yes, maybe sometimes you do have to like push through fear in order to accomplish something, but I'm talking about acknowledging the fear, recognizing that it's there, and also sort of pushing it to the side and just saying, and also it's going to be okay. And if it's my time, it's my time. And also I'm going to do everything I can to keep myself healthy, to protect the people around me, to value the life of the people around me. I think both can be true. But it just, I feel like when I made peace with that in myself, it changed the quality of my day-to-day life, because then suddenly I was noticing that perhaps like when I'm driving and there's like a, you're afraid that you're going to get in a car accident, or afraid of being mugged and murdered or whatever, it's like suddenly those thoughts might come into your head, but instead of having like a visceral fear that just runs through your entire body, it's like a kind of thought that kind of comes in like, oh my gosh, like this could happen. And then it kind of goes out again. And I start to separate the thoughts from the fear that can permeate the entire body. And so that's kind of what I was like alluding to in the beginning of the video, where I was talking about like there's your physical body, there's your mental body, there's your like eternal body, we'll call it, like the consciousness, and then there's I'm not trying to get into, I'm trying not to derail myself because I get on these rabbit holes. This is like ADD videos, but other ADD people will relate. But then I'm able to have that thought and let it pass through without it crippling me in fear. And I can watch it and go, oh, yeah, I guess we could get in a car accident right now. But if we do, if I die, if it's my time to die, it's my time to die. And I'm going to do everything I can to drive safely right now. And, that's just my way of coping with it. I think we all have different ways of coping with it. And I don't profess to be an expert in this. I'm just kind of sharing my process. But I do think some level of making peace with death is healthy, because then it's, guilt and fear are ways of other people can use to control us. And I think we did see that during COVID, that there were so many people afraid of death that we were easily controlled as a population. And I also see this happening in politics and in our society a lot, where guilt and fear are used as motivators to sort of make certain political issues really important, or to kind of like manipulate. And so if we have a handle on our own fear, and fear of death is a really, really big one, then it makes us more free. It makes us more independent. It makes us less susceptible to being controlled by something outside of ourselves that is going to like manipulate and play on that. Okay, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think.